on to the attorney. John, do you have anything for us?
Yeah. Brittany Woods again. I had a conversation this afternoon and with the attorney for Mr. Van Epps. And Will is going to love this, but the bank that he's getting his financing from, that Lake Shore Savings Bank, just won't issue him a letter of credit because they don't do it. So when we requested, we want a letter of credit, their comeback is we can't give you a letter of credit. And he doesn't want to go to another bank because he got such a great deal at this savings bank. So, so what the proposal is, and I didn't say one way or the other if this was acceptable or not, but this is just in theory, that the loan documents, and the loan is supposed to be dispersed after certain work is done. So the loan would have some language in it where funds would be assigned to the village if the things that normally would be covered by the letter of credit are not completed. So instead of paying the money to Mr. Van Epps, it would be paid to the village. The village would get that work done. And I discussed the issue of the phasing of the project and how that complicated issues because his funding is only for phase one, and he's got to get 70% occupancy before they'll talk to him about funding phase two. So now apparently Mr. Van Epps is agreeable to have all of the site work, which would include the roads, the driveways, the parking lots, the sidewalks, the sewers, and the water, for both phase one and phase two done during phase one, so that it would be covered under his initial funding if he doesn't get it done. So that's sort of the proposal. I'd have to actually see the documents before I could comment on, comment on it. But the other thing that Will and Jake are going to have to take a close look at is, he sent, and I think he sent, Will, you sent copies to the board too about, he's dropped his engineer's estimate originally for all the work was $1,059,000. Well, now he's got it down to $710,000. I don't know if this includes both phases, and I don't know why some things went down so much. Like he's getting a deal, I guess, now on sanitary cleanouts, because before the cleanouts were going to cost, $800 each. Now he can get them for $250 each. I don't. And then he's got the laterals, 6-inch laterals. 16. We're going to be $1,000 each. Well, now he can get them for $15 each, which doesn't make any sense to me. So you're going to have to go through this, and he's left off nothing about water service. Before there was $133,000 for water. This doesn't have anything for water. They've cut out for the earthwork and erosion control, whereas before he was going to have $132,000 worth of cost. Now it's down to $25,000. So he's obviously cut out a lot of that too. So I'm not so sure this $710,000 is going to pass muster or not. But I told the attorney that's not up to me. That's not a legal issue. That's going to be up to the Public Works Department and the Planning Board. The Planning Board ultimately is going to have to weigh in on the amount. But I suppose as long as all of the infrastructure for both phases can get paid out of his loan for phase one, in theory, I think it should work. And Will just have to coordinate his inspections of the infrastructure with the banks. They're going to have to hire their own inspector, another independent engineer, before they'll disperse the money. So he'll have to just coordinate that they do their inspections at the same time, so there's not any issue as to, you know, Will says it wasn't done, he says it was done. If they're both standing there together, I think you could probably agree on whether the work was done or not, and done correctly, properly. So in theory, I think it could work, but it needs a little bit more fine tuning.
It needs to be tweaked a little.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to the planning board. So the planning board will now look at the fact that originally it was $1,000 and now it's 15.
Well, I think even before it gets to the planning board, I think Will and Jake need to go through it and then talk to, you know, because it was submitted by their engineers, it was T.Y. Lin, I don't know the name, I forget the name of the engineer, but they, you know,
Right.
Will or Jake may want to have a conversation right with the engineer asking why, you know, before it was $1,000 for a lateral, now it's $15. How can you get a lab sewer lateral for $15?
I know most of the engineers for T.Y. Lin, and I
Yeah.
almost guarantee you, we're gonna have an interesting conversation.
Yeah, some things might have gotten changed, and maybe the engineer didn't know about it or something, but. Because I don't know how you get a sewer lateral for $15, the cost of that.
You can manipulate my numbers to come up with anything you're saying. There's a lot of manipulation.
So they're gonna, my feeling is that it's gonna be back up to the $1 million range. But, which is okay, you know, the attorney, I told him that, and so he's, you know, his proposal was that the village would have the right to $1 million of the loan proceeds to cover those things. If he never completes them. So in essence, it wouldn't be a loan to the village, but the bank would, then they're stuck trying to collect it from Mr. Van Epps, which if he hasn't completed it, I don't know, but that's their issue. I don't know how they're gonna do that. But it would have to be, you know, unconditional that they would pay it over to the village without any recourse to the village. The village obviously isn't gonna pay it back. The village is gonna use the money to get the infrastructure completed.
Sounds pretty shaky to me.
So this is going back to the planning board in September?
Yes,
Is he coming? Is he asked about-
they are on the agenda for September for a extension of their 1-year approval.
But I'm not sure they should do that until we have this issue ironed out. So it may or may not be on for September 6th. Because that's the planning board, that's what they're gonna wanna know.
Yeah.
This is really the only thing that's holding up construction of the project. So the bottom line may be, how much does this board want to see that project get off the ground or not? Because you can't force Van Epps to go, well, maybe you can force him by saying, forget it, we're not gonna go with anything other than the line of credit, then he's gonna have to go to another bank, and he'll be back at square one again. In which case, he could say, well, heck with it, I'm not even gonna build it, I'll just sell the parcel to somebody else. He has ownership of it now.
So, thank you for the update.
The other thing we talked
For-
about.
For extension, right?
The other thing we talked about was, as an alternative, was a performance bond. But Scott Sedelnik, that's the attorney, knowing Mr. Van Epps, he'd balk at whatever the premium is for the bond. But then Scott said, well, he's actually borrowing, his loan commitment from Lake Shore Savings Bank is $600,000 more than what ESL was willing to loan him. So he's like, well, maybe he can use some of that $600,000 extra to pay for the premium for the performance bond. I said, well, that would be a lot easier. Just get us a performance bond, which is like an insurance policy, and then this will go easy. It's just agreeing on the amount of the bond, whether it's the $710,000 or the $1,050,000 something. So we could insist on the performance bond, which is the easier way to go, but he's just got a foot, and I don't know what they cost. They're typically, I think there's something like 10% of whatever the cost of the, whatever they're supposed to cover, the premium's like 10% or something, but he's gonna have to look at, figure that out. So,
ongoing saga, Brittany Woods.
Jesus, I'm not- yeah.
Originally, they were supposed to begin, I believe it was in